Working as the Post and Courier's Clemson reporter, I get to cover some of the top teams in the nation. One of the things that makes my job really interesting is being able to be at the facility, talking to the players, getting to learn their stories. With a subscription to the Tiger Take, you'll not only get to read everything I write on postandcourier.com, but you'll also get the latest updates straight to your inbox. But more than that, you'll get insights that you won't find anywhere else. Hey guys, this is Jon Blau with the Post and Courier, here for our weekly countdown to kickoff feature. We're previewing the Notre Dame Clemson game with Matt Fortuna from The Athletic. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for a primetime game at Notre Dame Stadium, and a game that I guess has a little more oomph to it after both teams' wins over Syracuse the past 2 weeks and seeing Clemson appear as number 4 in the college football playoff rankings. So I'm excited.
Yeah, it should be a good game. Before I get to that, let me do a little plug quickly. I almost forgot, for our newsletter called the Tiger Take. Basically, you have your coverage in the newspaper and online. We also send you, though, a newsletter mostly daily to your inbox with extra tidbits and anecdotes and such things. And you can subscribe to that by going to thepostandcourier.com/the Tiger Take. And again, we are here with Matt Fortuna from The Athletic. I guess you cover Notre Dame. You watch them, a lot. What is the difference between the Notre Dame that we saw versus Marshall however many weeks ago and the Notre Dame that just squashed Syracuse? What has changed?
Yeah, I would I'd accelerate that timeline a little bit and say, what's the difference between Notre Dame that we just saw lose to Stanford a couple weeks ago and the one that just squashed Syracuse? And it's a good question. They've been very Jekyll and Hyde this season. I think the one thing everyone has kind of taken for granted was say what you want about the guy, but you knew what you were getting with Brian Kelly. He had a streak of 40-something games where he won as the favorite. I think Notre Dame still has a long winning streak against every non-Clemson ACC team dating back to 2017 when they lost at Miami. So it could get boring. I think there was a ceiling there, and I think everyone was kind of ready for a change. But you never know what you got till it's gone, right? And when you have a first-year head coach, some of the sure wins are no longer sure wins. Now, that doesn't excuse losing to Marshall or excuse losing to Stanford. We could rewatch those on end and still not come up with a good conclusion as to why those games happened. But I do think the Notre Dame we saw this past week against Syracuse looks like the Notre Dame team that we thought we were getting at the beginning of the season. It's a very dominant offensive line when they're playing well together. They're able to impose their will physically, run the football well. And they obviously have, for my money, the best tight end in the country. I know some Georgia fans will argue Brock Bowers, and he's obviously had a great season as well. But what Mayer has been able to do this year in particular, where he's the main target, everyone knows he's the main target, and he's still making crazy offense in a number of tight spots this year.
You bring up Michael Mayer. Dabo Swinney said he's a guy who he thinks is a surefire All-American. They do a lot of different things to try to get him open and utilize him in the pass game. I mean, what makes him such a special player, and how integral really is he to Notre Dame's offense?
He is Notre Dame's offense, at least their passing offense. He's really good, and to hear other people talk about him, and to even, he's a great interview. He doesn't hold anything back. He's pretty blunt, but he's a guy who really sets the right example, because he's a 5-star prospect who's broken pretty much every tight end record there is to break at Notre Dame, and still seems to be playing better and better throughout the season, even in a season that really is, I wouldn't say it's gone off the rails, but hasn't gone the way anyone at Notre Dame hoped it would go so far this season. He's big, he's strong, his hands are really great, and I know that sounds obvious when we're talking about a tight end, but I think that gets overlooked a little bit. He had a catch 2 weeks ago against UNLV, and it's one of those plays where it was either a really terrible throw or a really good throw, because it was put where only Michael Mayer could get it, but he really wasn't supposed to get it. The DB was face guarding him down the middle of the field, and yet he kind of, while falling back, reached his arm around the DB and caught it with one hand and brought it in. And in true Notre Dame fashion, that set up a 1st and goal, and they went 4 and out and came up empty on that possession. But he's really special. I mean, there have been so many 3rd down plays this year where you just knew it was going to him, and they were able to get to him. And I think part of that is the offensive line giving Drew Pine enough time to go through his progressions and wait patiently for Michael Mayer to get it in a more open spot. He's saved them from some tight spots this season. And if you look week to week, the targets versus Michael Mayer versus the targets versus wide receivers, they're very similar, right? I mean, numbers wise, he is more, he might at this point, and I should know this off the top of my head, I've been keeping track of it, but he might have twice as many touchdown catches as the entire wide receiving core at Notre Dame does this year. He has fewer yards, but it's too close for comfort if you're talking about 1 versus 4 here. And he's really stood out at a place where, again, they churn out NFL tight ends year after year after year, and it took this guy 30 games of his career to beat Tyler Eifert's catch record, and he beat the receiving yards record this past week as well. So he's a special player.
Yeah, and then switching sides of the ball, I think Isaiah Foskey is a guy that's come up a lot in terms of Clemson's concerns. His ability to rush the passer, I mean, how has he been able to affect opposing offenses, and how much of a challenge do you think he presents to Clemson?
Yeah, he's a great player, John. He's a guy who had a really tough decision to make at the end of last season and opted to come back for another year. And, from my understanding, like, he did this with the hopes of showing enough and improving enough on film to essentially become a top 10 pick. And I wouldn't call myself a draft geek the way so many others are, but certainly he's a guy who's playing his way into that first round status. I think the numbers weren't necessarily there early on this season, but he's really come on strong lately here. He'll probably end up with the all-time Notre Dame sacks record when it's all said and done at the end of the season. And him and that line, I think they've done a really good job of getting to the quarterback. They haven't always collectively done a great job of bringing the quarterback down. I feel like there's 1 or 2 plays every game where it's 3rd and long, and they blitz and they got the guy dead to rights and they let him away from his grasp, and he takes off and rumbles his way forward for 11 or 12 yards. And here we go again. So they've been good at getting to the passer. They haven't always been good at bringing the passer down. And as a defense as a whole, a lot of talented pieces on that unit. First year coordinator and Al Golden. Last week was big for them. They had 2 forced turnovers. They had a pick 6 on the first drive of the game for Brandon Joseph. But they have just 5 takeaways on the season, which I believe is a nation low. They have as many takeaways as they do block punts, which is 5. And that's really good for the special teams unit. Not so great for the defense. Last week was the first game where I felt like they truly impacted the game and made their presence felt. And at the end, with a big interception, killed a Syracuse rally late that sucked the life out of the building. So I think there's still other levels for this defense to get to. I think they have the personnel on hand to show it eventually, but they haven't really yet until last week. And they're going to need to do that if they want to spring an upset against Clemson.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, again, the record for Notre Dame, not what we expected probably coming into this game. Syracuse, why I say Syracuse? Clemson. Another orange team. I got orange on the brain. They're 8-0 despite a lot of close games. And obviously, like you said, the college football playoff, they debut at number 4. You're a national guy. I mean, you look at things from a more national perspective. What is the perspective of Clemson, I guess, coming into this game in terms of where they stand in the playoff picture, kind of, the respect for the ACC or lack of respect, and how big is this Notre Dame game, do you think, for putting another piece on the resume?
It's big. It's probably not as big as it would have been had Notre Dame played to its potential this season. I mean, this is a team that, as flawed as it is, again, they should never lose to Marshall. They should never lose to Stanford. And if that's the case, we're talking about a team that's 7-1 right now with a respectable loss to Ohio State in the opener. Obviously, that wasn't the case. It's still going to be a tough environment, although I'll venture to guess there's going to be a lot of orange there because these fans did not get a chance to travel to Notre Dame back in 2020 for that epic game. Look, the thing with Clemson that I find interesting, Vegas really seems down on them. And I'm sure you guys have noticed that there. Like, you look at these 2 teams and their resumes today, and you think Clemson should be favored by a lot more than 3, 4, 5 points, whatever the line is as we speak right now. And we saw that with their road trip to Florida State. We've seen it with some other games as well. I think they're hurt a little bit by the fact that, look, as good as that Wake Forest win was, there's some shine off it after Wake Forest lost in pretty crushing fashion last week to Louisville. Syracuse is slowly coming back down to earth. And that's a team that, as you know, and as I know, always plays Clemson well, no matter the season, but is clearly not a team that's going to be contending for an ACC title this year. But look, until last week, and I'm not like taking away from them, but until their last game against Syracuse, I was incredibly high on Clemson. I mean, DJ Uyunglele, say what you want about the guy. He had through 7 games before that Syracuse game, through 7 games as a second-year starting quarterback at Clemson, he had more passing yards, more rushing yards, more touchdowns, and fewer interceptions than both Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence had during that same point. And yet we saw him struggle against Syracuse. He turned the ball over 3 times. Dabo Swinney was quick to pull him for Cade Klubnik. And I think reasonable minds can debate about whether that really worked or not, right? Cade Klubnik attempted 4 passes. It's not like he lit the world on fire, but he definitely added some energy to that offense. They cut down the mistakes. They were able to escape with the victory. And you look at their schedule, it was very front loaded, right? Outside of Notre Dame and South Carolina at the end here, they really probably won't be challenged all that much. This is their last road game of the year. They're already done with their road ACC schedule. I mean, I think with the state of the ACC, you're probably going to have to go undefeated to get into the playoff. And I think this is the last quote unquote losable game on Clemson's schedule. So from that standpoint alone, this is huge, right? I think if they win this, they're probably going to be in the playoff. And if they don't, they probably won't be. So I think it's a very big game from that aspect. And again, prime time, Notre Dame. We all remember what happened 2 years ago during this game. It was epic. Clemson clearly had revenge on their mind however many weeks later when they stomped them pretty good in the ACC title game. But I'm looking forward to seeing what both teams bring on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's been brought up a million times. I mean, DJ Uyunglele a couple of years ago in South Bend literally still has the record for the most passing yards of an opponent. I mean, how much did that really raise the expectation level, do you think, for DJ? And how much do you think he's, what was it surprising that he's developed from so much from last year? Or is there still kind of a feeling he can get even better because you saw that 2 years ago, what he was able to do?
Oh, I think that absolutely created an incredibly high bar for him to clear. Now, that doesn't necessarily excuse the struggles he had last year, but I think this year you're seeing the DJU that a lot of Clemson fans expected to see. And frankly, that's a standard at a place like Clemson, right? They've won national championships with each of their last 2 starting I guess Kelly Bryant was in between there, but with their last 2 5-star quarterbacks, DJU fit that profile coming out of high school. And the standard is a standard at Clemson. So I understand why the expectations are high. I understand why at the outset of the season, when you had another 5-star like Cade Klubnik coming in and on the bench, everyone was kind of waiting for that other shoe to drop. It happened 8 games later than I think a lot of people thought it would. But to be honest, as much of a controversy as this is or isn't, I'd come out of that Syracuse game feeling pretty good about things if I'm Clemson, because you survived a close test when you weren't playing your A game. DJU, I thought, handled everything phenomenally well after the game in terms of the way he spoke about it, how he said he would have yanked himself to, how Dabo publicly said he's our starter. There's no controversy here. And yet, because the backup came in and won the game for you, albeit not necessarily with his arm, you've got to feel like maybe you don't feel great if you're DJ, but if you're Clemson, hey, if this guy's not working out, we do have an alternative here that we're not afraid to turn to. And he's proven already in a tight situation that he can get it done for us. So I get the drama aspect of it. I get the controversy because they almost lost. But in the big picture, I feel pretty good about myself right now if I'm a Clemson fan.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're looking at this from both perspectives, Notre Dame and Clemson, I mean, what are the keys or the things that have to go right for each side to be able to win this game? I mean, if you're Notre Dame, what do they have to do? If you're Clemson, what do they have to be able to do well?
Yeah, I think it's strength for strength when we're talking about Notre Dame's offensive line versus Clemson's defensive line, right? Clemson's one of the best rushing defenses in the country. Historically, they've just been a D-line factory, as has Notre Dame on the offensive line. And that's going to be a fun matchup. Who's going to win that battle? If Notre Dame can consistently move the chains on the ground and connect through a few deep balls, which they really haven't for much of the year, they'll give themselves a puncher's chance. They also need to build off that defensive performance from last week as well. Again, 2 forced turnovers. It's not the biggest thing in the world, but when you had just 3 on the year coming into that game, each one counts that much more. And I don't think Notre Dame can win this game without a big play through the air and without a big play through their defense or Clemson playing poorly in some way, shape, or form. Let's not forget, as great as both offenses were in that 2020 game, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah had a touchdown that he essentially ripped right out of Travis Etienne's hands and took back all the way for a touchdown. There were a lot of big plays on both sides of the ball in that game, which is what made it so memorable. And I think it has the potential to be that much more memorable, not necessarily from the stakes standpoint if you're Notre Dame, but in front of a packed house. Again, like Dabo Swinney, that was his first trip to Notre Dame. And he got the tour from Tim Beret, and Notre Dame, the fans that were there rushed the field. It was about as good of a scene as you could get given the circumstances of that year. But it still doesn't compare to a sold out crowd, 80,000 fans who've been tailgating all day, and probably thousands upon thousands of Clemson fans who were making their first trip to Notre Dame. So I think the stakes are pretty high on their own. The environment should add to that. I'm hoping for a good game, but I think Notre Dame's going to need Clemson to play poorly, and going to have their defense affect the game in ways they really haven't been able to before last week at Syracuse.
Okay, it's prediction time. I'm going to give out my very unreliable prediction. Let's say 28-21 Clemson. I'm just putting numbers together, basically. What would you say, Matt?
Yeah, I could, after last week, I could talk myself into this being a closer game than I think a lot of people think. Vegas knows everything, right? I mean, they haven't exactly been right about Clemson this year, but again, I trust those guys more than I trust myself. There's a reason they're there and I'm here. And at some point, you almost talk yourself into thinking Clemson's going to get got. And I don't think they're going to lose this game. I think Notre Dame will play inspired. I think as uneven as the season has gone for Notre Dame. They've got two big tests this final month between the Clemson game and the USC game, both of which they can play spoiler for those teams' playoff hopes. And if you win even one of those, you're talking about an 8-4 team, when a week ago we were wondering if these guys would even get bowl eligible. So I think there's still a lot of meat left on the bone for this Notre Dame team here. I just don't think they're talented or deep enough to keep up with Clemson. I'll go Tigers 31-24. I'll go with the 7-point spread, just like you.
Okay, sounds good. We'll probably both be wrong, but that doesn't matter. But all right, so yeah, thanks, Matt. I'll give one more plug for the Tiger Take newsletter. Go to postandcourier.com/the Tiger Take. Subscribe to that if you want. And Matt, how can we follow you? Where can we find your work?
Work at The Athletic. Please subscribe if you haven't already. On Twitter at Matt_Fortuna, and co-host the Shamrock podcast on The Athletic platform and everywhere you get your podcasts with our Notre Dame beat writer, Pete Sampson. So that's always fun. And if you're looking to learn a little bit about the team you're facing this weekend, please give us a download and tune in this week. Absolutely. Go listen to Matt and go read his stuff. So yeah, thanks, Matt, for stopping by, and thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next week. Should have fun at the game. All right. See you. Thanks.